G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this is a video tutorial on drawing hands. When we approach drawing hands, I'm going to talk about two things. The first thing is the construction or the basic anatomy in building hands. The second thing is the poses that you can draw hands with. When I say poses, it's easier to approach drawing hands with preset poses in mind rather than having to improvise every time. But it's good to be able to learn to do that. It just makes things easier. So when I say the anatomy or the construction of drawing a hand, you divide it into several parts. First of all, we have the wrist, which is like the basic tree stump, if you will. And then when the hand comes in, it branches out a bit from the wrist. So it sticks out more on the thumb side. So this is going to be the thumb side. More on this side than the left side, just a little bit on the left side. Okay, so it kind of sticks out a little bit more here. Now I draw a basic shape behind, which is something like, I don't know what you call that shape. It's like an off rectangle. It's a bit askew. It's a bit wider up the top. And the thumb sticks out the side and it kind of curves out. So you'll notice whenever you hold your hand out, in most poses, when you thumbs up or hand straight or anything like that where the hand is neutral, the thumb curls out. So keep that in mind. Keep that shape of the thumb. Now the hand, as you've probably noticed, there is a shape to the fingers and it goes something like that. So in a very simple way, you can follow that shape. I think I've drawn it a bit askew there. I'll just stretch it across. There we go. And that's the basic construction of a hand. So if I take that, I can draw it on a 3/4 angle. So this is the front. My terrible writing. Now, when it's halfway between facing frontways and facing sideways, it's 3/4. So it's same thing. We draw our tree stump and we start drawing our shape and we draw it like a three-dimensional shape. So if we had that askew rectangle and we draw it slightly to the side, it perspectives like this. Okay, so it's good in any aspect of drawing to have a good sense of space. But that's how we're going to approach our hand shape. Have that three-dimensional shape like that. Our thumb, again, so it kind of pops out and then curves out like that. And then, as with any perspective image, the fingers will follow that perspective. Okay. Now, as with the front image, how it sticks out on both sides, it also sticks out. That hand's a bad example because I've got my smudge guard on. But you'll notice that your hand kind of sticks out on this side as well. So this side is pretty much flat, on par with the arm. It's always good to use your own hand as a reference. So this part is flat, whereas at the front we have this big fatty bit. Right? And there are two parts here, and we can make this part of the construction. Right? One is part of the thumb, this nice chunky fat bit here, and the other is the edge of the palm. Okay? So we make sure that in this 3/4 angle we bring out both the fat bit of the thumb. Let's bring out the thumb a bit more. I think they're both a bit small. Okay, so the fat bit of the thumb, and we bring out that palm a bit. And then we have our profile or side. Let's bring this whole thing across a little bit. Okay, so in the side image, same thing. We start off with the tree stump, and this time we don't need that off rectangular shape because it's completely to the side. All we have to remember is that we have that fat bit of the front. The thumb still curves out like that. And the rest of the hand follows that perspective. Now, I've drawn the fingers a bit fat there. And remember, the only finger you'll see, bring the whole hand down a bit, sorry, above that end one is the next one because it's a bit bigger. Now again, these are cartoony hands, and as with my tutorial on drawing eyes, I tend to do my video tutorials on a sort of medium cartoony style. So it's cartoony, but not too Mickey Mouse cartoony. So it's more like a simple comic sort of style. So this is the basic anatomy of drawing hands. Now I'm going to just do a quick line art over this. Okay, so just to show how I go from this to the refined drawing. So as I usually say, or refer to it as, drawing the meat on the bones. So with this fat bit here, you don't want to fully follow the line. It's too prominent, but you kind of follow it halfway around like that. Okay, so same on this side. I bring it up and just slightly touch that. You don't really do too much. You'll notice it's a habit of mine to Control Z all the time. I have my keyboard on my lap. My fingers are always on Control Z. Unless I'm animating, I have it on the forwards and backwards frames keys. You get very used to keyboard shortcuts. Now the other line you can draw to add shape. So you see here we have these lines for shape. It adds depth to these fatty bits. But the other bit, this ridge at the very base of the fingers, if you just have the lines end like that, it feels a little bit empty somehow. But if you kind of add a half a line, like a very faint sort of line there, it helps separate the fingers from the palm. Okay, so let's approach this hand in the same way. Have the thumb curve out, draw the meat on the bone, nice fatty palm. Now, I always try and, when I draw fingers, it's most natural for me at least, to draw it essentially the top more flat and the bottom curves from underneath. So when it's bent, the top will show the rigid lines and the bottom curves. So just keep that in mind. That's something good to remember, you know, because even if you bend your fingers like this, the top shows the rigid shapes of the bends, and it's the bottom that holds the organic curves. Okay, but these hands are just very stale, neutral hands. And again, let's draw that very faint line there. I need to bring this out a bit, the fatty palm, as I call it. Well, I have been calling it, but I never call it until this video. And then our last picture is our profile. Now, since we can't do that faint line there anymore, we just kind of pop out a little bit of skin under there. Because if you hold your hand up, you actually see it bounces out. Then we go and do the fingers. And they are pretty poorly drawn, but you get the idea. They're our anatomical references. So again, they're not going to look natural because not many people hold their hand out like this very much, you know, but you get the idea. This is purely as a guide. I just feel the need to fix everything after, but okay. So now, when I talk about doing poses, when you're drawing characters and when you're drawing animations and whatever, it's good to have a kind of database in your head of things that you're comfortable drawing, because hands and feet are things that people often have a lot of difficulty drawing. They're very organic shapes. We see them all the time. We always know when something's wrong when we're looking at a badly drawn hand and we don't quite know why. So use your own hands as reference and always try and learn new poses that you can keep coming back to. So I'll show you just a few of the ones that I constantly use, right? One very common one is the fist. Now this can be done on several angles, and I'm gonna do several angles here. I'm gonna start on this side. I'm gonna just draw the construction so you can see how I do it, right? And then the fingers are gonna come around like that. I'm gonna draw, this is gonna be the back of the hand, right? I'm gonna draw another one facing up. Like that. I'm going to draw another one facing out. You'll kind of see where I'm going when I get there. So this, just kind of giving you a bit of a example as to how I draw the construction of my poses. So that's the first stage of construction. The next stage of construction, oops, I should have done this. There we go. Next stage of construction, I begin refining the shape. So let's take this one first. The wrist is fine. Okay. Now, a detail that I tend to work in quite often, there's a bone here on the side, closest to the pinky. Okay. This little ridge. And it just is kind of nice every now and then to just add that little bump. Okay. Now, like I said, this is the top view of the hand. So if I'm looking at it, I can't really do it because it's in a weird angle. Never mind. Okay, so we have the fat part under here because this is closest to the pinky. When I close that fist, this is here. So it's going to be quite fat. And then let's draw the fingers, just the lines dividing the fingers and roughing the shape of the fingers there. Okay? And then over here, because we don't see much of the thumb, it's on a bit of a weird angle, you just kind of show that shape, that fatty shape over the edge. And that's the whole fist. That's done. Okay? Now when I get to the line work, I'll talk you through a few other things. This is the fist front ways, like this. Okay? Now again, these are cartoony references. These aren't anatomically accurate all the time. But stylistically, they're consistent with the way I have always drawn hands. So I bring the thumb out and draw that fatty part. Bring the side out. And one thing that I always underestimated when I started drawing hands is that when you have a closed fist like this, these fingers are always quite short. They're just very little. I always used to draw like big things like that, but it's actually a little more like this. It's as simple as that. The other thing I even did just now is have them above the thumb, but actually they're behind the thumb. So I tucked that down just now. But you see, even that looks a little strange. So it's not that wrong to stretch it out a bit. So there you go. That's another pose. Or sorry, same pose, different angle. Now this one is facing forwards a bit more. And I use this quite often, especially for like, power up, super, Saiyan positions, poses. So these are the fronts of the fingers here. Like that. And I treat them like individual little boxes because they've got a top side like this and an edge like that. So I draw them all as if they're rectangles on an angle like that. So you can see I've separated them. They've got the top edge and the side edge. And then the thumb comes and curves over the side edge, over these fingers. Oops. Oops. That looks terrible. Get rid of that. There we go. Now in drawing the nails, fingernails, I'll just give you a quick little tip that I use when I draw the fingernail. I'm going to give you a close-up over here. That's my basic finger shape. It's very simple. I just have, this is the top edge, it's flat, and this is the curved edge. When I draw the fingernail, I just have a flat edge at the tip and I curve the end around like that. And if you want to add detail, you can add the cuticle, I think it's called, and the knuckles. But when I'm drawing the simple version, it's just that. Okay, so there are basic shapes, and I'm going to add the line work now just so you can kind of have that as a reference. Now remember, the reference link is down below, so if you want to have this file to look at and you have access to Flash, check that out. Okay, so same thing, wrapping the skin over the bone, the meat on the bone. It's essentially like drawing a glove onto a hand. Too easy. Okay. Now, same thing as when you're drawing that flat hand and I drew that line there. It's always very, it adds depth and detail just to kind of draw that ridge of the knuckles. So just kind of do that. There you go. And already that adds a bit more depth. And if you've got like a really veiny, strong, muscular hero or someone like a female with very bony hands, you can just kind of flick in a few lines there just to show the tendons at work. Not tendons, whatever you call them. I'm not a doctor, man. Leave me alone. Okay. Looking at this side. Drawing the meat on the bones. Oops. Cool. Pretty happy with that. Remember, when you draw that closed fist, make sure that these parts, this bottom of the palm here, is quite fat because everything's pushed down into here. And last example, these fingers I draw separately and first because they're at the front of the image and they've got their own little perspective thing going on. Like that. And if you want, you can draw the edge of the knuckle there to sort of add the detail. And add that thumbnail. And add the fat part of the fist. So, and I mean, the palm, the wrist could be going out in any direction. You know, you could have it behind, directly behind like that. You know, so I won't draw that in. And I'll leave this here as just a sketch. So that's the first basic pose. Rather than doing every other pose on all different angles, I'll just give you a few other poses that I use before we wrap up the tutorial. So, a very feminine pose. Now, these drawings, as you can see, are very masculine examples of hands. So I'll give you a female example of how I draw a hand. Same basic approach. So the tree stump is slimmer, so it's not as chunky. This shape is a little longer and slimmer, not too much so. Okay, and you just want to like when I draw the fingers, just think elegant, think light. Okay, so when you wrap the meat on the bone or when you draw the shape, you taper it down and add a little bit of a point that you can draw the fingernail over. And when you add the fat parts of the female hand, just elongate them. You don't need to make them as fat. And like when you add this little bone here, just make it nice and little. You want it very slender. You want it very nice. And it's not to say that there aren't, you know, masculine female hands, but we work with cliches. So this is an example of a female hand. It's also an example of a feminine pose. This sort of holding the two middle fingers together like that is it's a feminine sort of neutral pose. So if you're having a woman holding a cup of tea and you want them to look very feminine, it's quite nice to separate the pinky or you know, it's a very, even historically, look at paintings by Michelangelo and you know, frescoes of the Renaissance, and it's a very common thing to have this sort of, there are hand poses. Check them out sometimes. You're on the internet. Use Google. Look them up now. Good. I hope you learned something. There you go. There's an example of a female pose that separating the pinky finger and keeping the elegant female feel. So another example of a pose. What have we got? The pointed finger. So when I draw a pointed finger, I'll go back to a man hand. So I do that basic shape. When I do a pointed finger, an aggressive pointed finger, the finger curves around. It continues the shape of the fist, almost in the same way that the thumb curves. So when I, sorry, I'm just going to rotate this so it's easier to work with and turn it on a 3/4 angle just to demonstrate it a bit clearer. So if I'm doing an aggressive point, you want the finger to be straight, but then you want it to kind of like keep going a little bit just to show that it's a really aggressive pose. Then the others are just kind of tucked in like this. And the thumb is tucked in over the other fingers. Ignore that. So when we get to the line work, you'll see how that looks. That finger's a bit long, actually. I'll bring it back. But you can see that curvature following that curvature is quite an aggressive line. Okay. Now, another thing I want to cover briefly is cartoony hands, right? So some people wonder sometimes why some cartoons have 3 fingers instead of 4. I saw in one of the making of the Simpsons episodes where they were addressing that, why do they have 3 fingers? And I think they essentially said that it's because it's easier to fit them on. Often you don't know where to put that 4th finger. So when you're drawing a very cartoony hand, you know, you can use that block shape that I did, but it's often easier just to do a quick circle because it's very simple. And basic rules are the same. You're just going really cartoony. All right. So this could be the hand of a very chubby cartoon police officer eating donuts, because that's a lovely cliche, you know, and that looks okay. Like, it doesn't look out of place, you know, whereas this does. Okay. So let's give you another hand pose. Let's go with the, let's think. Let's go with a strong claw type hand. There's 2 cool ways that, like, there's a foreshortened way to draw that, which I kind of like. So I'll draw the normal one first. So stump up like this, the tree stump of the hand, and I'll draw another 3/4 angle and give it its own space over here. So its own 3/4 angle. Okay. Let me think about this. Whenever I do this claw shape, I notice that the pinky and the thumb are the most closed in. When you do the claw, they're very in, whereas the top ones tower over. So instead of doing them all even shapes, which looks very powerless, stretching out the top ones and concaving the inner ones gives it a much more wrapped around, tense look. So the first thing we do is we turn this angle so that the whole hand is tilted slightly. I'll bring it over here so we have more space. Then next, let's do the thumb. It's very concaved, right? And then like I said, the top ones aren't as closed off. Whereas as they get in, they close off more and more until we get to the pinky, which is basically wrapped around. Now the top one feels a little powerless still, so I want to wrap that around a bit more. And there we go. We have a basic clawing shape. Just using our anatomy, our basic construction lines. Oops. Okay, so I'll move that over there. And the other shape I was going to show you was essentially the same thing, but tilted back like this. And this is kind of cool to draw, like, you know, Goku doing the spirit bomb, holding his hands above his head, calling the people of the earth to give their energy. God, I'm a nerd. So you do this, you draw the tree stump, and we tilt this way back like that. So it's like on a very wrapped back angle. That thumb is wrapped out, and we see the fat part of the edge of the hand, but the fingers, ooh, where are they gone? They're at the very end there. So if you imagine, it's hard to do with this thing on. If you imagine this hand with the claw shape and we tilt it back, you notice that you see the palm and the thumb, but the fingers become foreshortened behind the palm. And it actually can look really cool when you just draw those fingers tips, because that's how it's seen. That's what it looks like. And that's another cool pose to go to. Now, I won't go over too many more. This is just a few examples, and there are lots of different poses. You've got, you've got, you've got, you've got, you know, there's like so many different ways of drawing hands. Not only that, lots of different angles. So use construction. Remember, look up anatomy. Just Google hand anatomy, and you'll see heaps of images. Just use that as references and kind of follow muscles and figure out your own system, because at the end of the day, you're going to find your own style. Okay, so I'm just going to do some quick line work over these to show you how I'd go about that. Now, like I said, with women's hand, you want to be very slender. A guide to drawing women's fingernails. I don't draw them like the men's ones. I don't draw the thing like that. It looks terrible. I just do an angle over the end. So if I was to close up, and that was the end of the fingernail, I'd just do that. It's really easy. Same thing. Very dainty lines. And there you go. Too easy. Okay, so this one over here, we've done that sort of closed fist one before, but this one has the pointy finger. And like I said, it kind of curves up a bit because we're being super aggressive with it. Okay. Let's go back over here to the cartoony one. Now, when you're drawing super cartoony stuff like this, yeah, I mean, it's almost like the, like those Mickey Mouse glove things. Like you can almost just add this and it's a Mickey Mouse glove, you know. In fact, I'll leave it there. Oops. So just think bubbly, cute. There's far less restrictions. You still want to follow the basic rules of drawing the fat bits where they go, and you know you can draw that line under there. But in general, it's very loose and relaxed. Over here we have our claw. Let's give this some nice freaky monster nails, as if it's the hand of a beast. So draw the claws. A tip to remember when you're drawing foreshortened hands like this, on this sort of an angle, something to keep in mind is that when you're drawing a finger curled facing towards someone, there's a lot of overlays with the folds of the finger. So again, so if it's like tilted forwards like this, the fat of the, you know, beneath, they kind of curve under each other like that. You see those lines, how they tuck into each other? So keep that in mind. These are all just little tricks you learn one by one. And again, look, especially beginners who are watching this, who are very new to drawing, this might be fairly intimidating because there's a lot of stuff I'm doing fairly instinctually that I've been doing for years. I've been drawing for a long time, part of which has been professional. So there are things that I just kind of do sometimes that I forget to talk about. Don't be intimidated. At the end of the day, it comes down to practice. So just do it. If you see things and you're confused and you don't know why I do them, try them out and maybe you'll learn firsthand for yourself what I'm doing. And if that works for you, then do it. And if it doesn't work for you, then figure out your own system. You know, it's all about trial and error. It's about stealing other people's techniques and making up your own. So there we go. There are our examples of some hands. I hope you've learned a lot from this tutorial. Now remember, I'm trying as often as possible to do these tutorials. I'm going to do another one tonight, so there'll be a foot one. Check that out if you're interested. But subscribe to my channel because I want to keep this a flowing system, and I want you guys to give me feedback. Tell me tutorials you want, and I'll put them on my list. And yeah, let's get this happening. So thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this video. Links are below to download the original files for reference. Remember, if you animate or draw something cool, be sure to share it on Newgrounds.com, the internet's best source for animations, games, art, and music. Until next time, see you later.